Hello everybody and welcome back to another Coalitions Revisited Review Examination. I don't know what it's called. You get the point what this is about. It's been quite a while since I made the last one. I think I looked it up and I think the last one was, it was Dutch-German coalition. I did 3 blue 4 coalitions and 1 red 4, so I think it's time to do another red 4 coalition. I was gonna think Red Dragons first, but I actually want to play it a bit more. I just couldn't find some games right now, and it's Monday evening and I don't have time to record a new video tomorrow morning before uploading, so I thought, well, that's quick to do. So I thought, okay, let's do Eastern Bloc. I did Entente already. USSR, I wanna take a look at, maybe I can get Putin to do something with me, who knows? So I thought, Eastern Bloc, which has always been one of my favorites. Eastern Bloc is just all around good. It doesn't really have any major weaknesses, but it also doesn't really have any major strengths, It's just been very solid pretty much everywhere, in every category, but it doesn't really excel anywhere. Kind of like, but effectively, in many ways, a weaker Baltic Front. Baltic Front also doesn't have any weaknesses, but it does kind of excel in motorized and infantry-based stuff. But let's not talk about Baltic. Let's talk about Eastern Bloc. Also, by the way, I just realized Eastern Bloc was also the deck I played in my very, very first Wargame gameplay video. So I guess this is kind of fitting as well. I honestly don't remember how I properly structured them back then, but I think I more or less just went over the unit categories and the outstanding units and stuff. Logistics types, I don't think there's anything major to say. Unfortunately, there's no 20-point supply truck available. Personally, sometimes there are situations where I'd like to have a 20-point. For team games, I think 30 points is probably ideal. For 1 vs 1s, I generally prefer 20 points, but 30 points is still very fine. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of 50 points supply trucks. Of course, the advantage of smaller ones is that for the same price, you do resupply quite a bit faster. But of course, they are less point efficient and also less card efficient as per how much supply you get. So it's a trade-off. I think Firestarter prefers smaller ones, but it's mostly up to preference. And of course, generally don't bother with helicopter supply. CVs, the good thing is they have access to MO17, so that's always a good choice. Tank CVs, T-72s are fine. Unfortunately, they're all 160 points, but don't really offer all too much, and only 2 top armor. They unfortunately don't have a T-72 with 3 top armor as a tank CV, which is unfortunate. And I think for 10 points more, the M84A, which, well, in my opinion, still not a very great tank CV, it at least can really fight very well, But I mean, it's still an okay tank CV. Generally, I'd say never use T55 tank CV because it has only 1 top armor. If you want, then you might as well, then I think it's even better to just take the BMP2 because the other cannon is at least useful against helicopters. Or maybe even just go for the SPW50. It's slow as fuck, but it has some armor. But I think, honestly, probably the SPW60 is, in that scenario, probably the best choice. KPVT isn't great, but it's at least something. And you're still somewhat armored and you're at least fast. And I think generally speaking, I take 1 armor and good off-road speed over like 2 armor and the horrible off-road speed, or saving 40 points. So it's not really the best thing, but it's okay. And then the USC is one of the better cheap CVs because you don't even have to pay 10 extra points for the decent off-road speed as compared to most NATO 100-point cheaps. They most of the time have to pay 110 points. Also worth noting, the Führungstruppe is actually a shock CV with CQC MG. So that, honestly, if it's in a building and the enemy is charging towards it, there's a chance that the Führungstruppe might actually win. But they don't have an Mi-17. East Germany only has Mi-8Ts and TVs, which are hot garbage. But if you were to choose them, if you want a ground transport anyways, then, SPW-80 or a Euro, it's not a worst choice. SPW-80 is, in my opinion, probably the only KPVT wheel transport that's actually worth using. because 20% accuracy isn't too shabby. You're not gonna do all too much against infantry, but it's alright against vehicles, especially in close ranges like forests. Anyways, infantry. You know, when I briefly took a look at my very first video, I saw Mordschützen with the 10-point BMP1. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. It used to be shit, then it used to be great for a while, and now it's shit again. I mean, I wouldn't really say it's shit. I think Nick the Man and I think Mr. Ghosty as well, they still kind of like to use the BMP1, or at least either of them, I don't fully remember. It's not a worst choice, but it's honestly not pretty, in my opinion, not particularly great either. The BMP2, for 20 points, the BMP2 isn't bad, but I think the fact that you have to buy 15-point infantry or 20 points infantry with it does hurt it quite a bit more. You know, if you had access to 10-point line infantry in that, it's a different deal. That's why I'd say that if you want an IFV with autocannon, unless you want like an AT-GEM or something, you should probably take Modus Reiki in the Vidra too. However, that's not a small issue. If you take a look at the Vidra 2, you notice that a Modus Reiki in pretty much every transport, they get, you know, 20 and 16 hardened. But if you are in the BMP1, for example, but if you take them in the Vidra 2, you only get 16, which that might not sound a lot, but it's 20% of the squads that you lose per card. Oh, that is actually quite significant, and you could take the Vidra 1, but that's just garbage. So that's very, very unfortunate, and actually hampers the card quite a bit, in my opinion, because most of the time you can't really justify taking 2 cards of those, and while they're good, they're not that great. Then of course Mordschützen themselves are still very, very good. In my opinion, significantly better than the base Proletary if you ignore the transports, because the difference between the RPG-7 and the base M72 Law is just so significant, in my opinion. First of all, it's so much more useful against transports in a defensive position like a town, because of the extra range and accuracy. The extra range helps a lot. And in forests, especially if you have 2 stacks, there's a much higher chance that 2 of these connect to kill a transport. Whereas with the law, it's a pretty big gamble. So that's why I think that the Proletary being 15 points is probably not even that big of a deal, because a lot of people were a bit outraged because, you know, 15-point Mordschützen used to be East Germany's flavor. Doesn't mean that the Proletary are bad. They're still very, very good. But if I had to, again, ignoring the transports, if I had the choice, I'd always take Mordschützen. So yeah, they're still very, very solid infantry. And the 5-pointer is alright that they get. It has 2 front armor, it has a heavy MG. The autonomy and especially the off-road speed do mean that it can be a bit annoying. And of course, with the meta massively favoring cheap infantry spam in these transports, followed by fire support, it's not really where Mordschützen excel at. However, their price and them being shock means that they can be okay as like screening infantry and meat shields, while at the same time being still able to fight on their own pretty efficiently. And their being shock means that they are very, very well suited for town fights. Decks like NORAD, for example, or US, that very heavily rely on rifleman spam. Rifleman spam doesn't work very well in towns most of the time. Some towns it works well because, you know, it's not a very deep town and you can still very effectively use your fire support. But in other towns it can be a bit awkward due to line infantry not being able to fire in CQC. Mordschützen 90, they're okay. You know, I wouldn't really say it's a must-have. You know, it's fine if you use them, it's fine if you don't. I'd just say it's not worth using more than 1 card. I think most of the time if you use the Mordschützen 90, it's probably because you want more heavy anti-tank, and 1 card of LSTR 40 is not enough, which is understandable. However, I also wouldn't really say, you know, your deck is garbage if you don't have them. The MG, even though it does say 600 rounds per minute, on average isn't necessarily better because it has a shorter burst length, meaning they have to reload more often, meaning that they get more affected by worse morale. It's still, honestly, still to this day, it's not really easy to say whether it's just better or worse, even on average. But of course, them being 5 points more expensive means that they are, you know, even if they're just slightly better, they're less cost efficient. You know, that's 15 to 20. It's quite a big step. And of course, they have a tad bit more accuracy on the main gun. But again, that's not really a huge deal. But I guess I should actually go from top to bottom. FJB 40, they are honestly pretty alright. They are just decent. You know, if it wasn't for LSTR 40, I'd say that it's not a must-have, but definitely suggested. In mech, they're nice to have because you can get them in the Mi-24D, you know, and you, especially in mech, you would definitely want to have at least like one kind of unit in an Mi-24D, and that they also immediately come on elite. They shouldn't really be underestimated. They're very, very well suited for just a low density flank protection, I guess you could say. Don't underestimate the Strela 3. It should be noted that they have a much shorter reload time of 4 seconds versus 6 seconds, which even though they only have 3 HE against helicopters that only have 6 HP, they get the second shot out quite fast. 17 AP, RPG 7, and them coming on elite or veteran means that it's still accurate enough. They're honestly very, very solid. And in a 1 versus 1 deck, not anymore, but I used to run both FJB40 and LSTR in an unspec ESOM block deck, and it was working pretty fine. But of course, I think most people and me also nowadays in an unspec deck, they only take LSTR 40. But again, I wouldn't really say that you're making a huge mistake if you take both. But don't use them as like infantry spam to fight enemy infantry. They're not very well suited for that. Igla 1, you know, if you want man pads, you know, I'm just gonna go over all the man pads right now. If you want man pads, the only choice really are Grom. They are basically Mistral squads with 1 less HE, and they're only 2 men, meaning that they cost 20 points instead of, I believe, 30. I think Mistral costs 30, right? Yes. Same range, same accuracy, but 1 less HE, of course, also less suppression, but they're also only 2 men. Yeah, they're very, very good, honestly, and especially with many or basically any packed AA piece or most AA missile pieces. Missile AA pieces like OSAs, they very often have 7 or at least 6 HE, meaning that them having only 4 HE is very often not really a huge deal, unless you only rely on manpads, because 4 plus 7 equals 11, and that's greater than 10, meaning that the plane is dead anyways. And so yeah, them having 4 HE is not really a huge deal. Used in the Promite is a very nice combination. You know, can also help you get, you know, if there's no OSA or something nearby, get that 1 extra 1 or 2 damage in on a helicopter, so the Grom only has to hit with 1 missile, or just additional coverage, as in like a bigger area that you can defend. Very nice combination. Yeah, that's really the main choice if you want manpads. But I think, as you know, unless you're playing like mech, there's no point in using them because you can just use LSTR. HGS-17, very good at killing infantry, especially when they're defensive in defensive position, most notably towns. Attacking with them, especially in forests, can be a bit tricky. While they have massive DPS, they also only have 5 HP. And if you end up fighting against a lot of IFVs or M113 spam, you're gonna have a hard time. I wouldn't really say it's bad to put them in, but they're more of a niche, more of a situational card, which is, you know, I think Eastern Bloc has a lot of these kind of infantry squads that you'd put them in if you had a 6th card available in an unspec deck, you know. In a mech deck, obviously easier to fit in, but if you use them, I'd suggest either the 5-pointer, the Vidra 2, to deal with IFVs in forest, for example, or the Mi-17. Commandosi, not particularly great. Only time I'd use them is maybe in motorized, you know, if you want like elite infantry spam when they're coming on elite veterancy as well. They are alright against infantry, they don't have the best anti-tank weapon. Or maybe you wanna, if you wanted elite Mi-24D in mech, or you want a second card of elite Mi-24Ds, you could take Commandosi. Other than that, not particularly great, and honestly one of the most overrated units. It's not like that anymore, but I remember like over the past years, all the time people were like, ah, come on, you see my my favorite special forces. I never understood why people like them so much. It may be that maybe they used to be very good early on or in Erland battle, I don't know. Like Berauta, again, one of those infantry squads that are they're very, very nice. They're very good to have, but sometimes you just can't fit them in. In MI-17 or MI-25 or OD-64, you know, all of these three, very good to have, very good defensively, especially in a 1 versus 1 on, again, low density flanks or something. Hard to get rid of if the enemy isn't doing a proper attack, because using IFVs against these can be a bit annoying due to their range. AP isn't really a big deal because, again, they're mostly there for killing IFVs. SMG is not that great outside of CQC, but they are mostly there for like holding towns. They're not really meant for pushing. Or, you know, it may be just, you know, you generally want like at least one card of infantry in an MS-17. I'd say. Even though I don't do that myself very often. Leichtschützen, they're also they're a bit underrated. I think people overlook them a bit. I think they do have the they have the proper stats nowadays for anti-infantry weapons, but they're actually quite a bit similar to Light Rifleman 90. They do trade range for the, you know, training, which is honestly fine, and a bit of accuracy. And they are also one of the few squads that actually have 10-point transports with the SPW 152. So again, one of these squads, it's pretty good, but it's just hard to fit in, because you basically always, whenever you can, you have to use LSTR 40. It's like one of those units that I'm like, you know, if you don't have that in the deck and you have it available, you can put it in, but you didn't. Just go home and redo the whole fucking deck, because that is honestly a must-have unit, you know. There's not a lot of units where I say that, you know. Like when I see deck review or something on bootcamp, people tend to shoehorn everyone into like a specific version of each deck, you know. Whenever someone's building like a Eurocard deck or something, it always ends up being the exact same Eurocard deck, because people like to shoehorn stuff, and I'm like, oh, let's just people learn the game first, you know. And if you're playing in 1 versus 1 deck, you know, I'm saying, okay, if you don't know how to use super heavies properly, don't use them, okay? So I'm like the kind of person who's like, all right, just if you're comfortable with the deck, then, you know, play it. And if you don't have like a Leclerc in your 1 versus 1 Eurocard deck, you know, that's fine if you can deal with anything else, you know. But LSTR 40 is one of these units where I'm like, if you don't have that in your Eastern Bloc deck, I'm actually gonna be mad. They're just so good. They're so good. And then I think I said it before, they're my absolute favorite unit. I wouldn't say they're OP, but they might be borderline close to it. I think the only reason why it's not very noticeable is because it's they're also kind of easy to kill, and it's not like they have a huge presence, immediate presence like something like Maglan, which is why I think it's not as easily noticeable. And they also used to be stronger when they had the 533 rounds per minute primary weapon. But they're just so good. They have an amazing anti-tank weapon. They're still a very good assault rifle, meaning that they're still decent enough against infantry. You know, if you compare them to FGB40, they have a standard assault rifle for elite, and they have the same stats here and here, but better stabilizer and significantly higher, not significantly, but a good amount higher primary rate of fire. Igla, again, you know, I've heard people say, oh my god, SAS are just better than LSTR because they have 5 HE on this thing, and I got go home, you fucking idiot. No, they're not, dude. First of all, you don't buy them purely for the man pads. Second of all, the Igla has more range, which is so much more useful than the 1 HE, because most of the time your LSTR or SAS are gonna shoot down helicopters, not planes, you know? And third of all, fucking Eastern Bloc AA all having like 6 or 7 HE. Again, that 1 extra fucking HE doesn't matter if you're actually shooting at plane 90% of the time, you know? And they're just fucking amazing. I could talk about them for ages, you know? Just take them. If you take them, I'd also heavily suggest taking them in the SPW 80. That allows you to get much closer to the front line, and if you're playing against USA, Nora, the LSCR 40 are gonna be godsend because they're very good against longbows. Because unlike normal manpads, LSCR 40 are 10 HP, much faster, and can defend themselves against ground units. Meaning you can get them much closer to the front line. Meaning you can get them much closer to a longbow. You know. And SPW 80, and also on the MI24D you only get 6 as opposed to 8. God, I just love these guys so much. They're so good. So good. Modschützen I talked about before. I wouldn't use them in a wheel transport because it costs 15 points. Probably you generally want SPW 50 spam. You may want to, sometimes maybe you want to get a flex card in the BMP2 or in the BMP1. Again, personally, I wouldn't recommend it. Modschützen 90 again, if you want a bit more heavy anti-tank capabilities for forests, they unfortunately lack the range. Motostrike, they're good if you they're okay if you just want like cheap rifle spam, because they have a 5-point transport with 2 front armor. Unfortunately, that transport doesn't have a heavy MG, only a 7.62, and also only 1 side armor. They also get the Conqueror's M BMP2 transport. In an unspec deck, I wouldn't suggest using it. In a mech deck, sometimes they're nice to have. AATGM IFVs aren't really that useful anymore, or that much use anymore, especially with the smoke meta and stuff. Doesn't mean that they're useless though. I think people like to dramatize, is that a word? How big of an impact the whole smoke and super heavy meta and shit have, and everything is useless now. It's just garbage. They're not useless. Jeske Bereti, basically 15-man Modschützen, so you pay 10 points for 5 HP. Not worth it. They're not worth it. Don't use them. I guess they do get 17 AP. Oh no, that's the 90s version. Okay, I guess the 90s version do get 17 AP. Still not worth it. Don't use them. Don't use them. I mean, I guess if you want, like, for some reason, like very cheap ATGM sum, you could use them in a 5-pointer. I wouldn't suggest using it though. If you want something like that, take Leichtschützen instead. Other than that, take Conqueror's M. I wouldn't really use them either. You can, if you want to use them, either maybe just want to use them for wider 2 spam and you want 17 AP, 15 rounds per minute in the forest, I guess okay. Or again, if you want the Conqueror's M transport, similarly to Panzerjäger. Again, fist squads generally, if they're not small or something like Eric's, not that great anymore. Or if you want a cheap MI17, that's also another choice. Piechota's Mech are basically like Motostrike, but they get the RPG 7 instead of the 20 rounds per minute RPG, what's it, 15 or something? 75, sorry. And they also get a 5-pointer with 2 front armor if you want that. Other than that, the transports are basically the same, except they don't get the Conqueror's M transport or the Vitra 2. Manpads I talked about, ATGMs I mentioned, Conqueror's M, they are probably your go-to choice. Yeah, honestly, that's the best choice. The Fagots are, again, if you for some reason want like a very cheap low-end ATGM swim, I'm not a fan of it, but in a 1v1, depending on your playstyle, and if you were to know who and what deck you're playing against, you might want to do it, but in that scenario, I'd suggest using it in a 5-pointer. And if you want a cheap MI17, there are better choices than the Fagots, in my opinion. Reserveschützen not worth it because they're coming in a 10-point transport, meaning even though they're 15 men, they cost 15 points a pop, and it's much worse than having a 10-man squad at 10 points a pop. So Percy, not particularly great. So Percy Sturmovi, again, they have their shock flamer squads, the only ones I believe, significant or quite some anti-infantry capabilities. Again, hard to fit in most of the time. And flamer squads in general are so niche. Yeah, I think, again, if you had like a 6th card, you might want to put them in. In the motorized deck, they're probably okay. But other than that, they are literally Modschützen, well, not Modschützen 90, but these are literally Modschützen. If you want wheeled Modschützen, take these because they can get a 10-point wheeled transport. Or if you want them in MI17s, I suppose. They are basically Modschützen 90, but instead of the LMG 944, I think it's called, they have the RPK 74, and they have a standard assault rifle. Same reason. If you for some reason want them wheeled or in an MI17, take those. Shock fist squad, but they have a recoilless rifle, which means that they don't get a rate of fire boost, meaning that they're not very good. And the range isn't particularly great either. Definitely skip them. Basically, base score on a Strikey. They are just like they're literally light resistant, but they're regular instead of shock, meaning that they're worse against infantry. But they get the MI-17. You know, not particularly great, but you know, in MI-17 or MI-24D, if you want more range than the La Caperota, maybe that's what you want to do, but they only get 175 meter more. Meh. Championiere, again, I would skip. Wizard Kari and Wizard Kari 90 are literally copies of these, and I'm not gonna try to pronounce them, of these squads, just with different transports. So more or less the same applies to them, you know. And they have the cool Wizard Kari song. Look it up on YouTube. Regiment, definitely skip. 50-man squads, terrible anti-tank weaponry, SMG, which is bad, and bad transports, definitely skip. If you want something for town fights, take Mordschützen, or take the Polish Mordschützen clones in the wheeled transport if you want wheels or helicopters. Skip, definitely. Should you want militia, I take those, but they're not particularly great because their weaponry isn't outstanding, even for militia standards, and the transport is bad as well. Another Flamer squad, again, same applies to those, not really worth it. Alright, well, it's already 26 minutes. I think I'm gonna speed this up a bit. Artillery, most of the tube artillery is useless. If you want tube artillery, I'd either say take the German Mister over the Ondava. Let me just quickly open up the armory tool. I think I never really did a short video of that. I should make a short video on the armory tool because it's so useful. It just takes minutes to start up. You might think, well, I mean, okay, hang on, there we go. Let me see if I can get that on screen. Please. Holy shit, sorry. Does this work? All right, I guess I can't show it to you right now. Anyways, okay, so if you look at the Ondava, you'll just have to believe me and listen to what I'm saying. And the Mister. So on the unit cards, it says they have both 5 rounds per minute. And on average, per minute, the rate of fire on the Mister is 5.56. I'm gonna call the East German thing a Mister because it's literally a clone. And on the Ondava, it's 5.63. So on average, the Ondava is actually faster, right? Well, that is only because the Ondava has a salvo length of 10, meaning that if you tell the Ondava to fire somewhere, it's gonna fire there until it fired 10 times, and then it's gonna stop. Assuming it has at least 10 rounds to shoot. The Mister has a salvo length of 5, meaning it's shooting 5 times and then stops automatically. The actual shot reload, meaning the reload time of one shot to the next, meaning the time between the individual shots of the same salvo, meaning the time between the first and the second and the third, and so on, shot on the Ondava is 8.5 seconds, meaning it shoots, reloads for 8.5 seconds, and then shoots again. The Mister has a shot reload of 6 seconds, meaning it shoots, reloads for 6 seconds, shoots, and does that 5 times, or I guess it reloads 4 times. So the actual rate of fire for the individual shots on the Mister is significantly higher. So you might think, well, why is on average rate of fire on the Ondava higher then? Well, that's because the per minute rate of fire takes the salvo reload in time, meaning that the Mister, it takes 24 seconds to fire 5 shots, ignoring the aim time, and then for 30 seconds it has to reload, meaning that within 54 seconds it shot 5 times, since 30 of those seconds are taken to reload another You know, after each salvo, it has to reload for 30 seconds. It's for every tube artillery piece, you know, and the Ondava basically shoots 85 seconds until the salvo is empty. You know, this may be a lot of, I guess I'm overcomplicating a bit here, but what I'm saying is that you heavy artillery, you generally never really want to shoot 10 shots in a row. You most of the time you want to snipe high value targets, or maybe a recon or something you spotted. So you want like 5, 4, you know, maybe 6 or 7 shots at max. But by having 8.5 seconds between the individual shots, it's a lot easier to evade the Ondava or survive an Ondava salvo. Whereas the 6 seconds of the Mister, which while it isn't particularly great, is still better because you know, it gives you a better chance of actually hitting several shots on one target, assuming your opponent pays attention. You know, if I explain it in a weird way and you couldn't understand me because of me, you know, basically I'm saying is if you want heavy tube artillery, take this one, okay? I tried making these work, but having only 6 HE is not particularly good. I guess the only other thing is you could use here the P1K, whatever they're called. I can't really recommend them because generally I'm not a fan of 10 HE pieces. If you have made good experience with them and you have special cases where you use them, I guess use them, but I'm not a fan of them. But that is also just partially because I barely use them. And when it comes to rocket artillery, there's only 2 choices really. Well, I guess 3, because the RM70 and the East German RM70 are set copies. And that's the RM70, or the East German RM70, and the BM27. The East German RM70 is like a ghetto plummen. It's usable for affecting morale in an area, or potentially making a huge smoke wall. It's not great, but it's not really terrible either. BM27, again, when it comes to cluster artillery, it's not great, but it's not really terrible either, you know. It's usable if you want cluster artillery, but everything else is really not particularly good. This is utterly useless. BM21 Grad is basically same as an RM70 with half of the rate of fire, so it means that it's easier to get out of the artillery barrage. And I think that's... Don't they have... Hang on. Oh yeah, and then there's this cluster thing which is also just bad. Don't use it. Right, now AA, which is where Eastern Bloc is very good. Eastern Bloc and Baltic Front are quite a bit step ahead, I'd say, when it comes to AA compared to... Well, maybe not Entente. Well, Entente is a different thing altogether, but compared to the Soviets, even though they share many pieces, but the fact that they have the Erikois and the not FJB, LSCR 40, that is such a big boost, because again, 7HE 7+4 means, you know, if you hit with an OSA and if you hit with LSTR or Erikois, plain dead. And you basically always have Erikois or LSTR around. OSA AK and OSA AKM, like, I'm gonna use the East German ones because they actually have this in their name, but they're stat copies, of course, of these two. Both very viable. AK is basically purely anti-plane. AKM is more not well-rounded, but you know, also usable against helicopters, you know, with the extra range. Both very useful. No, it depends on what you want, you know. It's fine to use either. The base OSA is also okay. Basically purely anti-healer, but it's also very cheap. Also only comes with 4 missiles and 35% base accuracy. Definitely up that if you use that. Coup M, kind of like a meme unit, but honestly it's not really that horrible because it has fucking 9 HE. It doesn't really have, but for how slow and thing it doesn't have quite the range. But it's honestly not really that horrible, you know. If you use a 2 or maybe 3 stack out that, those are gonna fucking fuck up your opponent. You know, but on their own, they're not that great. But they're also only 45 points, you know. If you want to meme around a bit, they're really not that bad. The Tor, you know, it's all basically like a tracked AKM, but it just does everything better. It has more accuracy and has more range. It's also one of the only 2 AA units that actually outrange a longbow. So if you have big issues against longbow, you might want to use that, or the Tunguska. It's very, very good. It's just tracked, the AKM is wheeled, and that's probably the major difference as to why people choose one over the other. Generally, you don't really see people use both. It's not really that bad. Again, it also has only 4 missiles like the Osa. Is fire and forget, however, and has stabilizers. You know, also significantly less range. But generally, with LSTR, you don't really need that much low or any low-end AA. Seralton M, also very okay. You know, if you want a self-sufficient AA piece with lots of ammo, no radar to micro, you know, it's all right. It's also amphibious. It has stabilizers. Faster 4. You know, I never really use it myself, but again, it's not really that horrible. You know, it has 12 missiles for 30 points. Fire and forget. 40% accuracy isn't that bad. You know, again, it doesn't really. It's honestly not that bad, but you know, there's no point in using it when you have LSTR on the map, anyways. You know, and for base defense with no armor and being a missile-based system can be a bit. Shilkas not that great. The main issue with Shilkas is that they have to reload quite quickly after their salvo. Against planes, that's generally not an issue because most of the time the plane is out of range once you're out of once you have to reload with them. But against helicopters, it can be a bit of an issue, which makes them not very suitable as base defense. And I think looking at the price and the ranges, you'd say, oh, they might be decent for base defense, but they're really not that great for that. The North Korean one is a bit better because it also has, I think, because it has no radar. So that's what it's got going for it, but these I'd skip. Tunguska is alright, of course. The gun on the Tunguska is ridiculously strong. Unfortunately, it's not the M version, meaning that the missile is not that great. But again, it outranges a longbow, so there's that. 5HE mortar. If you want a 5HE mortar, take the Czech one because it has more ammo for the same price. And it might also be faster. I'm honestly not sure. Oh, same speed, but for the same price, you get more ammo. You know, 81 instead of 60, so take the Pram. Strop to one of the most overrated units in my opinion. For 60 points, it is wheeled and has no radar and has good range against helicopters. I'll give you that. But the range against airplanes is trash. The rate of fire on it is honestly not that. Hang on, let me take a look at the rate of fire. Strop 2. Let's compare it with the Gepard. You know, even though it's radar, but just radar based on the rate of fire. The rate of fire is a bit higher than Gepard. Not significantly though. 0.3 shot reload instead of 0.4. But you also have to see it has only 35% accuracy with 60 points. And again, the range makes it basically useless against planes. Just due to the fact that, you know, outside of something like an A10, they're probably just based on pure elevation, they're way above or out of range of the Strop 2. So it's really not good. And the fact the missiles, they're okay. At least the missiles have stabilized, but you also only get 4 of them. And for 60 points, in my opinion, that's just bad. It's just bad, honestly. If it was like 40 points and without the missiles, it would be a completely different thing, or maybe 45 points based on the range against helicopters. But for 60 points, it's. I know a lot of people swear on it, but in my opinion, it's just bad. For wheeled AA, you always have LSTR. You might not necessarily have the same effect in an opener because you have to unload them and then they're out in the open. But outside of that, there's no. In my opinion, don't use it. Strap 1 and Praga, I honestly just don't have experience with them, or not very much, but I think based on that, I think they're just not very good. Strap 1, terrible autonomy. It might be decent for base defense. Let me take a look at the rate of fire on the Strap 1. Oof, no, it has terrible rate of fire. 0.6 shot reload, 60 rounds per minute. Nah, it's not good. Then there's the Nevers. If you want to have a missile AA, I'd say either use this Never because it's wheeled, makes it easier to relocate. Or use the Cup M4 because for 15 points cheaper you get the same, basically the same missiles. Where is it? This thing here. It's a bit slow, but it's also 15 points cheaper for the same missiles. Stat-wise, they're pretty decent. They're just your heavy AA unit. Tanks. Moderna, obviously 3 per card, basically a must-have because at 40 it just doesn't quite pack the punch or the armor to properly duel it out with super heavies. Your cheap tanks are basically like nothing below the Wilk is really good. Nothing cheaper than 85 points in this tank tab is good. Some people like the Dyna, but it's just a 65 points glorified Arcane carrier. It has 13 armor, which speaks for itself, but it has bad poor optics, it has bad speed, it has a bad gun, doesn't even have... If it had 2275 meter range on the gun, I'd say it's okay, maybe even good. But the gun and the lack of optics makes it just not a very good unit. If you have the points spare, it may be okay in an armor deck, because sometimes you just want the range on the ATGM, and on Elite, okay. But outside of that, and even in an armor deck, I wouldn't suggest using it, but outside of an armor deck, don't use it. Merida is alright. The base T72, sorry, is okay. 4HE autoloader. T72M only 12. If it had 13 armor, it'd be a different thing. But also, if you want a cheap T72, I'd just take the base one, honestly. Also doesn't have medium optics. 75 T72s are just garbage. The East German 80.1 is honestly not that bad, but for 5 points more you can just get the Wilk, which has more armor, and most importantly that extra rate of fire, and 4 top armor, especially against laser guide bombs like a Kernas, that helps massively. So that's also like an issue. If they had a cheap, or if the T72 was like maybe 40, maybe okay, 35 points would be OP. But if it was 40 points, or if they had or if the T72M was better, that would help them a lot. Ease them up quite a bit, I think, more so than the other East pack nations. But everything, including the M1 Wilk and the Wolf, is basically good. The T72Ss and the S1, they're not great. They're all right. I think if you want to take either, I'd personally take the S. You do get like 2 more tanks per card on the S1 though. I'd say it's definitely worth paying 5 points for that sphere. The M1M 90 points. I used to underestimate this unit and the T72B, but they're honestly not that bad. You have to micro the sphere a bit, but it can really be worth it in some situations. M2 Wilk is very good, 2RD is very good, or pretty good. It's basically an HC Abrams, Moderna, obviously very good. Just keep in mind that sometimes super heavy duels can be a bit awkward because you have only 8 rounds per minute and less armor and AP than most other super heavies, when you combine them. But it's cheaper, it's 3 per card, and it has the autocannon, which can be nice. Recon. How long is this going? This is going way too long. It's already 43 minutes. Recon. Recon helicopters. If you want a Recon helicopter, take the Mi2. There's nothing really else to choose. You want something wheeled? I'd say take the BTR-40. It's cheap, it's fast, it has good enough autonomy. Not great, but good enough. And the CPTU is actually basically a KPVT, but more interested helicopters, which can be nice if you want to use it as a base defense-ish type of unit. More suppression and a significantly higher rate of fire, making it a lot more useful than a KPVT. Sneska is just very, very solid. Good armor, good autocannon, cheap. What more do you want? It'd be ridiculously good if it was wheeled, but it's not. The 15 points PT-76 is also a decent choice, 2 front armor, 15 points, good enough gun, heavy MG, not to be underestimated. As for Recon infantry, Alright, there's a Salamandra. It's if you were to play with the fob in a 1v1, I'd say, and you're wondering if you might use it or not. I'd say, okay, sure, go for it. If you're not using a fob in a 1v1, I would not use it. It doesn't have a whole lot of ammo for what it does, and not having stealth, and not being particularly fast, and only having 6 HP, and no autocannon or anti-air missiles, it can die pretty quickly without much effect, you might want to take a look at it and say, hey, it's kind of like a ghetto tiger, and in a way, I guess it is, but it also loses everything that makes the tiger so survivable. The 8 HP, and most importantly, the stealth. So, I'm personally not a fan. I think a lot of people like it, but I'd suggest that if you only use it if you're already playing your deck with a fob. In a team games, it's a different situation. It's probably also easier to fit in. So I guess you might as well, sure. But even then, I'm not a huge fan of it. Which isn't me saying that it's bad, by the way. I just not a fan of it. Spezialauflehrer, very, very decent shock infantry, 17 AP, so decent enough anti-tank weaponry. They don't quite reach blue 4 levels like Commandos Para or Fallskampsjäger or Ranger, but at least it can kill most IFVs in one shot if they hit. Unfortunately, not available in mech. I would personally not use them in the SPW40. In my opinion, most recon transports are just bad. SPW80, again, not really that bad with the 20% accuracy, and coming on, what's the middle veterans called? Hardened, I think. Hardened, it's good enough. Specialnie jednotki, if you want the special forces or the heavier anti-tank weaponry, that's your choice. Very, very good. Recon infantry. Two-man squads if you want them. There's no reason to take them if you can take Spezialauflehrer. The sniper is not worth it because generally you don't want them to fire anyways. Formosa. If you want something that can just completely demolish infantry in towns or in forests, you may want to take one card of these. They have ridiculous anti-infantry DPS, but they're just utterly worthless against like infantry, and especially if you're playing against a deck that just spams cheap infantry and cheap transports. That's not what you want. And so with Mordschützen, you already have good infantry power for towns, so you don't need them. But if you were to build a deck that's like where beforehand, you're gonna have a lot of town fighting or something, you may want to take a card, maybe even two. But I think it's like one of these units that you only want to put in if you know exactly what map or what position you're gonna use your deck in, Not something that I would put in like a general use type of deck. Vehicles ASU-85M, don't be fooled, they have only 6 rounds per minute on the HE gun. Not 8. 8 only goes for the AP round. HE has 6, which is massive. If it was the other way around, it's not a big deal. But this means that as for fire support for Eastern Bloc, not particularly good. So there are only a couple of worthwhile units here. This is actually okay for like base defense and shit. You just spam 5, 6, 7 around your base. They're not that bad. The Prime is alright. 5 HE, good range. Don't underestimate the Conquerors, because a lot of people just ignore this unit when they see it, because very often there's bigger units to kill. But honestly, not that bad. Can't spot for itself though. Poor optics. Other than that, there's nothing really noteworthy. Some people still like to use it ZSU. I'm personally not a fan, but it's not really horrible. Helicopters. If you're going for AA helicopter, I'd personally use the Sokol. For 30 points less. You are slower, you have less HP, sure, but for much lower cost, you also have medium optics, meaning you can basically spot for yourself against other helicopters. And you also have more accuracy on your missiles. You have a bit less range against helicopters, but they're still good enough versus helicopters, And you don't really want the range against airplanes anyways. That's something you never use for in any case. Hang on. Oh no, never mind. Both have fixed guns, so they don't have turrets on the guns. So if you want to shoot something to your right, you have to turn the whole helicopter. So the gun isn't really much better on the Mi-24P either. course, you get a Coke on M. But the thing is, let's say you want, like, you're saying like, I want to heal or drop something there. I'm not really sure if the enemy is gonna send a helicopter on their own there, so I want like an anti-air helicopter just in case. But if you have the Mi-24P, you have to spend nearly 100 points just for something where you're like, maybe, you know, just in case. Whereas the Sokol, for 30 points cheaper, you know, for that kind of role, does basically the same thing. Of course, if you buy the Mi-24P, however, there's no helicopter, you still have a decently capable anti-tank helicopter ready, you know. It's not like it's like a T-190 that like 90 points and there's no helicopter, it's useless, you know. It still has uses outside of killing helicopters, you know, there's that. The Sokol also does kind of with the rocket pods, but obviously not nearly as much, not nearly as useful. In the end, it comes down to your preference, but I personally prefer the Sokol, especially because most of the time I use 2 helicopters anyways, with the Mi-35 being my second helicopter. Some people prefer the Mi-24P because the P has more rocket pods. You know, if you want the more light vehicle or infantry killing capable helicopters with just a few ATGMs, you know, you might want to take this. The Mi-35 gives you more ATGMs but less rocket pods. The Mi-35, however, also comes with the YAG-B, so that means that there's a turret on the gun, meaning that it's much easier to actually shoot at stuff with this. Whereas the Mi-24P has a fixed gun. I think none of the Eastern Bloc helicopters have the Gush 30K with the turret. Some people select this. I'm not a fan of it because you basically pay for the rocket pods and that's it. And just 4 of these rocket pods for 75 points is you know. And since you don't get a veterancy with like infantry inside, like, you know, when you buy infantry, it also comes with low veterancy, meaning that the ATGM is not that useful, you know. If you have an Mi-25 with specialities, you know, it at least comes on veteran or elite, you know. But you know, it's not bad, but the thing is, the missiles are just kind of useless. Air. Okay, so most of these planes are just basically useless. The Albatros is actually not that bad because you can get like 2 of them on veteran and it's okay versus helicopters. You just most of the time don't have the space to fit in. MiG-29 is probably your best bomber. You could also use the MiG-25. 85 15 HE bombs is quite good. It does have less ACM and the worst turn radius, and having 8 bombs, I believe it also basically means that it's longer in the air dropping bombs, you know, whereas the MiG-29 only has to drop 4 of them, meaning it can evac earlier. The MiG-29, you might say, well, it's only 412 HE. Trust me, you know, the actual damage of the MiG-29 is quite a bit more. It's more like 4 times 16 HE or something along those lines. So don't be fooled by the stat card. And of course, it leaves napalm behind, meaning that you can also use it to block like small choke points. Very good bomber, also very survivable. Has good short range missiles. Just very good all-round bomber, honestly. It's not like ridiculously good, but it's very capable. Lazur, your anti-helicopter hunter. Some people prefer the L-17K. I personally still think that the Lazur is better because if you take a look at the R60M and R60, you notice that while the R60 has 10% less accuracy and 1 less HE, it also takes, and get ready for ASMR, 1 second less to reload. Which is quite a big deal because that means that the L17K most of the time can only get 1 of these out, whereas the Lazur can get 2 of them out in 1 run. Which is, quite, in my opinion, quite a big deal. It is less survivable, and it is generally worse against planes, but in my opinion, against helicopters, the Lazur is better. And I believe, if I'm not wrong, and you can get the Lazur on a higher veterancy as well. L17K is 3 on veteran. Lazur, oh no, okay, never mind, I was wrong. Then you have the anti-tank, you have the Syria, very solid. It's not very survivable, but ATGM planes generally evac earlier than bombers most of the time, so it's alright. It's just very solid, 2 times 30 AP. What more do you want? When it comes to seed, you have 2 choices. Personally, I think the East German one is much better because of the significantly higher range, meaning that the enemy has less time to react to this should they spot the seed plane. Should the Polish one get the missiles out, obviously it's basically a guaranteed kill or hit, depending on whether the enemy is using something like a Challenger marksman. But again, the Polish one allows the enemy to have much higher reaction time. It is also more survivable, but you also have to see that to shoot the missiles off, you also have to go deeper into the enemy AA net, you know, so maybe it's not actually that much more survivable, you know. It's also more expensive, and meaning that it always shoots its missiles in bursts of 2, meaning that means that it also has a longer reload time. Since it has to reload more missiles, and seed missiles take a long time to reload. And the East German one has these 2 shitty Molniers, which are basically worthless, but you know, every now and then, once in a blue moon, they actually hit something. Then we have, when it comes to ASFs, you have 2 choices really. The East German one isn't really worth it because you do sacrifice 1 veterancy step to get Fire and Forget on your long range missiles, which is not worth it in my opinion, because you get only 2 of them. If we were to get 3 of them, it would be a whole different deal, like the KWS. But having only 2 of them is not a big deal, because if you're engaging an enemy plane, you would have time to get 3 long-range missiles, Fire and Forget long-range missiles out, whereas semi-active planes can only get 2 out due to the nature of them being semi-active. Which means that most of the time, one of your missiles being Fire and Forget as opposed to semi-active is rarely an advantage or a significant advantage when you have only 2 missiles. It's maybe like hard to explain, but just believe me, it's generally not worth it because you basically are also less accurate. The range is kind of useful on the semi-active missiles as well, but also it's not really a huge deal. But basically, imagine that the MiG-29 had 65% accuracy instead of 60 compared to the MiG-29, East German MiG-29. And then I think you'd maybe agree with me that the East German one is probably a better deal. And then there's also the SS-25K, which isn't particularly great because it has only 1 rear armor. Thank God, though. Now imagine if that had 2, it'd be cancer. MiG-23ML is actually also an okay choice for ASF because you get 3 of them on elite, I believe. If you want, like, for 1 versus 1, if you're saying like, 130 points is a bit expensive for me. Now the MiG-23 is honestly not that bad. I think that's the MiG-21ML, good rocket pod plane. The MiG-21ML is better if you want to get rid of, let's say, something like IFVs, you know, or something that has 2 armor or more. The Polish rocket pod plane, the MiG-21MF, is more for like killing or stunning vehicles or killing infantry blobs. It has bigger splash, it has more HE, but it struggles against vehicles with 2 or more armor. Whereas the East German one is much better against killing something like even up to 5 armor, I believe. At least 4, but definitely 4, but maybe even up to 5 armor, you know. So if you want a rocket pod plane, you know, depends on what you want. I believe the MiG-21MF also reloads significantly faster, which may also be something you want to look at. Other than that, it's really all the noteworthy planes. You know, there's the semi-active ATGM plane. You know, if you were to need a second one, maybe you want that. But oh, right, there's the seaplane. Don't use it. It has no stealth. I guess it is actually an okay missile, but it has no stealth, you know, and that's not very good. So that wraps up Eastern Log. Went on longer than I thought it would. Also, I think, yeah, internet is dead as well. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I don't know what the next one will be. Again, I might try to play some games with Red Dragons. Fucking hell, dude. So again, if you enjoyed the video, No. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll hopefully see you next time.